In this lesson, we'll be creating a sweep animation for the line graph. Okay, so let's take a look at what we have so far. If I come around here, you'll notice that I have this spline that I don't have any kind of geometry created for. I have it for pretty much everything else, but we still have this out on its own as a spline. So let's use a sweep and another spline to be able to give this a little bit of 3D form. So I'll just come up here, we'll drop in a sweep, and I'll drop that line plot underneath the sweep. Now that doesn't do anything because we have to tell it what kind of shape we want to sweep along this line. So if I come up here and I click and hold, and I've got a lot of different choices for how to draw splines and splines that are pre-made as these shapes. So I'm just going to choose a simple circle. And you'll notice that this circle is huge compared to this line. So if I drop it on there as it is now, you won't really even be able to tell what it is. So let's just turn the radius down just like that. Now let's grab it and drop it underneath the sweep. Now you can see that this is still way too big, but it's a little bit easier to translate in your mind that the circle is being swept along the path of that line plot. So let's actually come back in here and decrease that circle's radius to get this to look a little bit closer to what we want. And I think that looks pretty good right there. At 1 centimeter, we're coming in really nicely. Now, sometimes whenever you have a graph like this that has really sharp points in the places that it meets and starts going in a different direction, such as this area here, you might get a little bit of a strange thing happening. And we're not really having it so much here, but depending on how you drew yours, if it was a line that was coming to such an extreme point, you might have this little bit of geometry here on the tip shooting way up into the sky. So there's a way that we can fix that if things like that happen. And we can also kind of fix this little point here if we don't want it to be quite so spiky looking, because this area down here doesn't really have the same look to it as this one up here. You can see that's a much finer point. So what I can do is turn off the sweep for a moment. So we go back and we're just looking at that line. Then I'm going to jump over into my front view. So I'll just middle click and come over here to front and middle click again. And then what I'll do is go out of object mode for a moment, out of this model, and come over here to points. So if I click points, now I have access to the individual points that are meeting to connect those segments of my path. So what I'll do is select that point that I think is maybe creating too fine of a point whenever the geometry is added. I'll right click and choose soft interpolation. Now this is going to give me way too curvy of a motion, but what I can do to fix this is come in here and grab these handles and pull them in so there's still just a tiny little bit of soft interpolation. I usually like to pull them in just so they're on the edges of that blue axis. So you can see that it still looks very similar to the way that it was before, but now if I jump back out to my perspective view and I turn back on the sweep, you can see that that point is not nearly as fine as it was before. But it also has a little bit of this kind of strange issue up here on the top. So let's see if we can't fix that by going back into our front view. We'll turn back off the sweep, select the point, and if we zoom in enough, you can see that those handles are still there, and we might need to just pull them out a little bit further. Let's try it again. And you can see how it changes the way that this looks. And if I have the sweep turned on, you can see even better how it changes over time. So this is what it looked like originally. And then the way that you turn these handles is going to make a difference on the way that that ultimately looks at its point. Now I think this looks pretty good. So if we jump back out here, you can see, sure enough, it's not quite so pointy. So you could duplicate that process on the rest of your points if you wanted to smooth them out a little bit and not have them be such a sharp edge. Now, let's say that those points are all finished, and what I want to do now is be able to see this drawing on over time. So what I can do is come into that sweep and take a look at this end growth property. You can see how this allows me to set keyframes, because it has this little dot next to it, on this property and change how much is visible of this line over time. So what I'll do is at the beginning, we'll start it out at 0, and I've got my current time indicator on that 0 frame, and I'll just control click the end growth property. And then let's come forward to, let's say, about 60, and I'll turn that back up to 100, and we'll click it again. Now if I come back to the beginning and I hit play, you'll notice that Cinema 4D has a little bit of a natural ease in that it slows down very slightly at the end and kind of eases out, being slower at the beginning and fastest in the middle of its animation. Now we can push this to a little bit more extreme of a look. So what I can do is right click my sweep, go into the show F curves, and come in here and start to pull out those handles. So if I do this, it's going to be much, much slower at the beginning and at the end, and then have the most increase in speed in the middle. So instead of Xing out of this, I'm just going to pull it off to the side for a moment. And let's play through this again and see what it looks like. So it starts out kind of slow, goes through really quickly, and then slows down immensely at the end. Now, one way that I could slow this down even further from the way that I have now is to maybe add another keyframe right about here. So what this does is adding a keyframe towards the end by just control clicking, and then pulling this second keyframe forward a little bit gives more time for that animation to very slowly finish off. And if we take a look at our timeline, we have a little bit of a crooked line here, but we can smooth it out by grabbing those handles and kind of playing with that look a little bit. What I would do to be able to see this whole thing is just go to frame and choose frame all, and then I'll grab this last point and make this a little bit less extreme like that. Maybe pull this down a bit and smooth that out. Okay, so now let's take a look at our animation. Very nice. So we get a really fast motion in the middle, and then it very slowly comes in at the end. Perfect. Okay, so our next lesson, we're going to move on to preparing our text for animation by positioning the axes in the different places that we need for our animations to originate from.